These folks might otherwise be in prison, and I think it's pretty widely known that prisons aren't generally all that helpful to people, especially with mental illness.
Most people have heard about the guilty except for insanity verdict, or the insanity plea as it's more commonly known. But what actually happens to people who are found guilty except for insanity after court? Are they institutionalized, sent home to freedom, sentenced to prison? Here's what happens in Jackson County.
Hello, I'm Bill Mance with Jackson County Close-Up. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're here with Doug Houston. Doug is the program manager at your Jackson County Mental Health, and he's here to shed some light on what happens to those who are found guilty except for insanity and how case review and supervision is keeping our community safe. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Happy to be here.
We're going to talk today about the Psychiatric Security Review Board, and so tell us about that and why it was created.
It was created over 40 years ago in response to a couple of things. Sort of the recognition that the criminal justice system isn't sort of a just or a very helpful place for people with mental illness to spend years, decades of their life. And conversely, the hospitals were sometimes releasing people into the community without sort of a full consideration of public safety. So this is sort of a blending of that. And it exists in one or two other states. Different states across the country manage this judicial outcome in different ways. And here, we have really excellent statistics with this organization. So what typically happens is after they go through the legal process of pleading and having a forensic evaluation and all of that stuff, they're at the state hospital for a different period of time. It depends on the case. Could be years, could be less than a year, would be very unusual. And then they begin to step down to lower levels of care depending on how well they're doing, how compliant they are. So there's a piece of both treatment and compliance and monitoring with the Psychiatric Security Review Board. And that's really with public safety being one of the main considerations, as well as the client themselves. So as they step down incrementally to various levels of care, they get more freedom, more independence, and that is dependent on how well they're doing and how well they're sort of following the rules. So there's really kind of a tight leash on folks, making sure that they don't get released in the community or in some level of autonomy that they're not quite ready to handle.
Right.
And so the statistics are really great for this. I think it's about 0.5% recidivism compared to 20% or more with other criminal justice folks. And so the way it comes into our county is that there's a secure residential treatment facility in the county where about half of these folks out of, say, 15 or so total in the county, they reside, and they can come back into the community from that locked facility if they continue to do well. They could come into a foster home or into independent living themselves eventually. And they're monitored by a case manager here at Jackson County. Often we provide their treatment. Sometimes it's another agency that provides the treatment, but we provide the monitoring. And so that is comprised of lots of structured time each week. It can be people that are working in the community, but also there's treatment groups and there's drug screens that are done every week. And so there's a fair amount of monitoring, but only to the extent that's required given the person's history and their compliance.
Tell me how this really impacts the people's lives and how that's helping for this great success rate.
These folks might otherwise be in prison, and I think it's pretty widely known that prisons aren't generally all that helpful to people, especially with mental illness. Sometimes they're not able to be in general population with other people. They end up in isolation, and that makes their mental illness worse, typically. But they don't really get off easy, per se. So if there's sentencing guidelines for the crime that they committed, they have to plead in at the top of their sentencing. So let's say it's a 10 to 15 year sentencing guideline, they have to plead in at 15 years. And for some people that feels onerous over time, but they're getting to enjoy the freedom that they're able to earn and live pretty full lives in the community compared to being in a prison.